Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to our Media in the Vietnam War lecture video. I'm Aubrey.
I am Casey.
Chris.
And let's get into it. Let's start off with consumerism. After World War II, America had a large influx of money which went to its multiple industries. Now that the middle class had so much money, they always wanted to buy the newest technology, that being TVs. This new medium allowed for instant transmission of news, which would heavily impact how the Vietnam War was shown to the public. During the beginning of the conflict, there were very few reporters in Vietnam, but as the war progressed, more and more reporters came, reaching a peak of 400 journalists in 1965. The media was very positive in the beginning. They focused on the bravery of the American soldiers, the military victories of the war, and the constant struggle of benevolent capitalism and despotic communism. The government also attempted to keep the message of the Vietnam War as positive as possible with the introduction of the Military Assistance Command of Vietnam, the MACV. The MACV also allowed reporters to get up close and personal with the military in what eventually came to be known as the 5 o'clock follies. At 5 p.m. every day, the military will hold a press conference where they would talk about the major events happening in the war. The government uses this as a way to foster trust with the people and make the people optimistic about the war. While the MACV influenced journalists to write positive articles, they were not forced to write specifically positive things. They could write and record anything they wanted to with little intervention from the government, which would result in more negative press down the line. They started to use this power when they saw how the people of South Vietnam saw Ngo Dinh Diem as a tyrant who did not care for the people. The fact that the US government was working with such a tyrant caused some people at home to raise their eyebrows, but negative press would really take a head during the Tet Offensive.
The Tet Offensive was a coordinated attack by the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong against hundreds of towns, villages, and cities all across South Vietnam in early 1968. The main objective was to topple the American-backed government in Saigon and to discredit the American government's claim that communist forces were depleting and that the war was close to a finish. The brutal defense shown by the South Vietnamese army caused people at home to wonder if we were the good guys. A key part of this attack was the takeover of the US Embassy in Saigon by North Vietnamese forces for about 6 hours, leading to American forces having to fight their way back in. This story regarding the US Embassy takeover was watched by millions of Americans, and it was truly embarrassing for the Americans seeing the embassy, a symbol of American power, being attacked. It was here the suspicions of the government really began to climb. Americans were being told that America was winning the war, but the images that the media were showing to them seemed to reflect American forces were not having an easy time. Although the Tet Offensive was a total military failure for the communists, it proved to be a strategic success in the long run. As you can see in the picture, public attitude towards the war started to shift after the Tet Offensive and continued to shift in 1968 after the My Lai massacre. Good old Walter Cronkite. Cronkite was a news anchor known as the most trusted man in America who had originally supported the war efforts. However, after 2 years of fighting, the Tet Offensive convinced him that the military was barely making progress. A broadcast by Cronkite was released where he said that the war is unwinnable and should end through negotiations. There's a story that involves Johnson saying, "Well, if I lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America," after hearing the broadcast. This shows the major influence that media sources had over support for the Vietnam War. The My Lai massacre was one of the most horrific incidents of violence in which American soldiers invaded a small village, opening fire on about 350 unarmed Vietnamese civilians. The initial objective of the mission was for American troops to enter the village for a search and destroy mission. However, American forces were angry from human losses in their unit from the Tet Offensive, so they vented out on the unarmed civilians at My Lai. After the incident, the military issued a press release that informed the media, but they were filled with false content. The media quickly picked up on the fact that this was a government cover-up, increasing the credibility gap of the government. The My Lai massacre also further increased the growing opposition to the war back home, leading to anti-war protests and riots. The media became the pathway for information regarding the Vietnam War because of an unreliable government.
The Pentagon Papers was a report of the United States Vietnam affairs from 1945 to 1967, commissioned by Secretary of State Robert McNamara. On June 13, 1971, the New York Times published a story on the Pentagon Papers, which were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, who was a military analyst working for the government. His leak showed that there were many inconsistencies and flat-out lies from the government. The Pentagon Papers detailed involvement in Vietnam across several presidencies, unbeknownst to the public. Some of these involvements were, in 1950, Truman gave military aid to France against the Viet Minh. In 1954, Eisenhower gave military assistance to the French in Vietnam. In 1961, Kennedy adopted a broad commitment to aiding the war in Vietnam, although the public had been told that there would be little United States involvement. And in 1964, Johnson began military operations against North Vietnam and aided South Vietnamese soldiers a full year before United States involvement was revealed to the public. Upon hearing this, Nixon immediately filed and received a court injunction that prevented the New York Times from writing any more about the Pentagon Papers. At the same time, though, the Washington Post was publishing articles about them, and the court denied Nixon's attempt to get a court injunction. This inconsistency brought the situation to the Supreme Court, where in New York Times v. United States, the court upheld the Times' right to publish about the Pentagon Papers under the First Amendment's freedom of press. In response to this, Nixon attempted to discredit Ellsberg's leak. To do this, within a week of the New York Times publication, Nixon organized a team called the Plumbers to dig up dirt and embarrass Ellsberg. Funnily enough, this team of plumbers was the same one that later became famous for their involvement in the Watergate scandal. The Pentagon Papers intensely fueled the anti-war movement and are credited with being one of the most influential helpers in ending the Vietnam War. Here's our bibliography, and since we have some time left, let's go over the times of U.S. government transparency with the American people during the Vietnam War. Okay, thank you for watching.